echo of the past. Michael walked ahead, his flashlight piercing the oppressive darkness of the abandoned hospital corridor. The beams flickered over cracked walls and peeling paint, reflecting shards of broken glass in the doors and eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Every step he took echoed through the empty building, creating the unsettling feeling that someone was following. Emily walked close behind, gripping her flashlight tightly. Her eyes darted across every corner, noticing old signs that indicated long-abandoned hospital wards. "This place feels frozen in time," she whispered, her voice barely reaching Michael. "As if everyone just vanished one day and never came back." Christine followed a little farther back, her boots rustling across the dusty tiles. She shivered from the cold. "I've read stories about this hospital. They say experiments were conducted on patients here. Some even claim that they—" Her words caught in her throat as a faint metallic clatter echoed from a distance. Michael swung his flashlight toward the sound. On the floor lay a metal tray, rocking slightly as if nudged by an invisible hand. He frowned. "Wind," he said evenly, though he felt uneasy himself. "Old buildings always creak, make strange noises." Christine shook her head. "No, this is different. Something lives here." Emily swallowed hard, a chilling mix of fear and curiosity twisting in her stomach. They walked down a corridor that split into two directions. One led to stairs going down, the other deeper into the hospital wing. On the wall, a faded arrow painted with old, dried paint pointed to the right. "Go down?" Emily asked, trying to steady her voice. "Better to go right first," Michael decided. "Maybe there's more to see there." Around the corner, they stumbled upon a long corridor. Along the walls were stacked wheelchairs, some overturned. One slowly rolled backward across the uneven floor, though no one touched it. All three froze, watching it as it collided with the wall with a dull thud. "Okay," Michael exhaled heavily. "Maybe the floor is sloped. No need to imagine horrors right away." Christine shook her head again. "No, this isn't just an old building. Something lives here." Their words were confirmed by the quiet sound of footsteps behind them. Everyone turned. Flashlights swept across the corridor, but it was empty. The silence was so thick that they could hear their own hearts beating. Emily whispered, "We're not alone." They continued, trying to ignore the sensation of invisible eyes watching their every move. The corridor opened into large double doors labeled operating room. The glass was completely shattered and a cold draft blew from inside. Michael shone his flashlight into the room. Rusted operating tables stood in rows, dusty metal instruments scattered nearby. Yet, amidst the grime, something gleamed. A surgical scalpel, perfectly clean as if freshly polished. "Do you see that?" Emily asked, approaching. "Yes, that can't be," Michael replied, frowning. He stepped closer to the table. When his fingers closed around the scalpel, the flashlight flickered, then went out. "Christine!" Emily screamed. In the darkness, a sound scraped across the floor, slow but purposeful, as if someone was circling them. Faint footsteps, ragged breathing. Emily felt cold air brush her shoulder and recoiled, hitting the wall. "Turn on the flashlight!" she shouted. Michael pressed the button repeatedly until beams of light cut through the darkness once more. The scalpel was gone. Only a thin layer of dust remained. "It disappeared," Michael whispered. "I told you," Christine shivered. "This place is cursed." From the depths of the corridor came another sound, first A faint metallic ringing, then louder, persistent, someone striking metal rhythmically. Clang, clang, clang. "I don't want to go there," Emily said. "Let's turn back." But Michael, despite the fear, stepped forward. "We're already here. If we run now, we'll never forgive ourselves." The sounds led them to an elevator shaft. The doors were open and darkness swallowed the abyss inside. A metallic knock echoed from below. Emily peered down and nearly fainted. A figure stood in the shaft, tall, unnaturally bent, with long arms. It paused and slowly turned its head towards them. Its eyes glowed pale green. Christine screamed. The figure began to climb the shaft walls at an incredible speed, leaving deep scratches in the metal with its long fingers. "Run!" Michael shouted. They sprinted back down the corridor, looking for a room to hide in. Behind them, metal tore and walls creaked faster than any human could move. They burst into the first room they found and slammed the door shut. Inside, it was pitch black. Only the weak flashlight beam illuminated old cabinets. The pounding on the door was so strong that it creaked and bent under the blows. Emily trembled, covering her mouth to keep from screaming. Michael braced the door, which groaned with each hit. Then a whisper sounded, right next to their ears, though no one was in the room. "You shouldn't have come here." The door burst inward and darkness surged in, alive. The darkness swallowed the room, leaving only the weak light of Michael's flashlight. The doors shook from the blows outside, and the air was filled with the smell of rust and old medical alcohol. Emily pressed herself against Christine, trembling. "What was that?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. Michael braced the door and took a few steps inside, illuminating the room. Old cabinets, broken windows, debris on the floor. But amid this chaos, something flickered. A small screen of an old monitor on a table. It glowed strangely with blue light, even though no one had turned it on. "This is impossible," Michael muttered. "Someone was here very recently." Christine stepped closer. On the screen, flickering images appeared, operating rooms, empty corridors, and occasionally shadows moving on their own. Her heart tightened with fear. This is some kind of trap," she said. Suddenly, a faint knock sounded from the back of the room. Their flashlights darted toward an old shelf where something seemed to be moving. The tall figure they had seen in the shaft appeared there. Irregular, long arms and the same pale green eyes. "Run!" Christine screamed. Michael grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the door. Emily barely kept up with him. Each step on the dusty floor echoed dully. As they ran into the corridor, the walls seemed to move themselves, creating distorted shadows that reached out toward them. They turned a corner and came across an old room with beds covered in dust and old sheets. Michael peeked inside and noticed something that seemed horrifying. On one of the beds lay a figure resembling a human, but faceless. The body was motionless, yet the air around it rippled as if its breath could be felt with the whole body. Don't look at it," Emily whispered. Christine tried to find something to block the door. Her hands touched an old medical container barely standing upright. She pushed it, and it fell with a crash, partially blocking the doorway. The figure paused for a second, then slowly rose like a liquid shadow reaching toward them. "What kind of place is this?" Christine asked quietly. "Why is everything alive?" Michael felt cold breath on his neck, turned, no one was there.
A feeling arose in his mind that the building itself was watching them, merging the dark shadows that had once been people. They moved down the corridor further, and suddenly the floor trembled. Old tiles cracked, and beneath them something moved slowly. Emily stumbled and fell to her knees, clutching the floor. Michael helped her up, while Christine ahead had already spotted narrow stairs leading down. "We have to go down," Michael decided, though his heart was pounding wildly. The stairs creaked under their weight, and from below came a faint but distinct whisper. "They have returned." When they reached the basement, they were met by a room filled with old equipment and numerous lanterns flashing without any visible power source. Lists of patients hung on the walls, birth dates long past, and nearby, unknown marks in red paint. Christine leaned over one of the documents. "These experiments. They experimented on people here. Look, Akila's anesthesia records? Operations without painkillers?" Her hands trembled and her eyes slowly widened in horror. Suddenly, from the darkness came a loud crash. Something had fallen nearby. Michael's flashlight illuminated a dark figure. Now it stood directly in front of them, motionless, only watching with pale green eyes. Who are you?" Michael tried to ask, his voice trembling. The figure leaned and whispered, You shouldn't have come here." The sounds of footsteps echoed from all sides at once. Darkness swirled around them, creating the sensation that they were in a labyrinth where the walls were alive. Emily suddenly screamed, "There! Doors!" They ran, finding a small passage leading further into the basement. The darkness thickened, and each step echoed dully. Michael illuminated the path, but the flashlight's beam seemed weak against this unknown force. Suddenly, Christine fell, hitting something metallic. The flashlights revealed an old wheelchair on which another figure sat, completely wrapped in torn bandages, its eyes also glowing pale green. "Don't stop!" Michael shouted. They rushed on, the corridor narrowing, walls seeming to close in. Whispering and pounding followed them at every step. Emily felt short of breath, her heart racing, and the shadows seemed alive. Finally, they ran into a room with many windows. Moonlight filtered through the broken glass, creating strange silhouettes. Michael stopped abruptly. Before them was a narrow corridor with the sign, "Exit." But the shadows in the basement seemed unwilling to let them go. Figures appeared in every corner, in every shadow. "We won't survive," Christine whispered. Michael stepped forward cautiously. "We have to try." Then there was a loud explosion. The walls shook, and Michael's flashlight began to flicker. They took a few more steps, and suddenly the corridor vanished. Instead, before them was only a black passage, swallowing all light. And in that moment, they realized the building had chosen them, and it had no intention of letting them go.
The black passage swallowed their light, and Michael felt the tremor of the corridor run through his entire body. Emily gripped his hand, her fingers white with tension. Christine, ahead, as if trying to find any support in this sea of darkness, pressed her flashlight to the maximum. But the beam dissipated instantly, vanishing into the dense shadow. "This is impossible," Emily whispered, barely audible. "We're no longer in the hospital. This is something else." Michael looked back. The darkness was thick, like dense fog. The corridor they had walked through disappeared behind them, and even the traces of their steps dissolved as if they had never existed. He realized this was not just an old hospital.
It was something alive, something that altered the space around them. Suddenly, a sound echoed, like an old medical alarm, loud and sharp, resonating through the passage. Faint outlines of people appeared from the darkness, the same pale green eyes, motionless bodies wrapped in bandages, yet ominously alive. They moved slowly toward the trio, gliding silently across the floor. "Stick together," Michael shouted, trying to guide the group. Christine tripped over something metallic, a fragment of an old catalyst that had previously stood in a room. She fell to her knees, and the same figures that were approaching began to halt around them. Their eyes glowed brighter, and the air grew thick like heavy smoke. Emily felt someone touch her shoulder, and her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. She spun around sharply, and there was no one there. But the whisper in the air grew louder. "You should not have come here!" Michael tried to lead them onward, and they finally came across stairs descending deeper into the basement. They began to descend, but each step felt endless. The stairs seemed to stretch, and the darkness swallowed their weight. "We've lost time," Christine whispered. "This isn't real. This is a trap." Below, they entered a hall that was at once familiar and alien. The walls were covered in old medical diagrams, depicting bodies with markings resembling chemical experiments and trials. But the most horrifying thing, in the center of the hall stood a round apparatus, resembling an old X-ray machine. Its screen glowed red, and the air around it hummed quietly with mechanical noise. "This is a laboratory," Michael said. "They conducted experiments here, and they stayed behind." On one side of the hall, an old wall collapsed, revealing a new passage. A figure emerged, a woman in a torn medical coat, her face blurred as if melting into the darkness. She grabbed Christine by the shoulder. "Don't touch her," Michael shouted, pushing the woman back. She laughed, not with a human voice, but with a hoarse, distorted, mechanical sound. "They won't survive. You will remain here forever." Emily jumped, trying to pull Christine away, and at that moment, Michael noticed that new figures surrounded them. The darkness filled with their faces, their eyes glowing pale green. They didn't move like humans. Their speed was unnatural, but their movements were oddly fluid like liquid. "We can't stay here," Michael yelled. "Now or never." He dragged Christine and Emily with him, forcing a path through the crowd of dark figures. Flashlights flickered, and the air was so dense it felt like they were drowning in it. Suddenly, the darkness parted before them, and they saw a small opening leading into another room. They dashed toward it, pushing with all their strength. Inside the room stood a large mirrored screen, reflecting not them, but scenes from the past. Frames of experiments, medical operations, people suffering. These are them, the ones left here," Christine whispered. They stayed behind." Michael approached the screen. His face appeared alongside the shadows of the past, and he felt something cold and invisible pulling him inward. Emily screamed, trying to pull him back, but the force was too strong. At that moment, it seemed they would be swallowed. An explosion of light occurred, an unknown source, bright and blinding. The figures in the hall stopped, then vanished as if they had never existed. Michael, Emily, and Christine found themselves on the floor, gasping for air, surrounded only by debris of old equipment. The darkness retreated, leaving cold walls and an empty hall with no trace of the horrors that had pursued them. They got up, holding on to each other, their hearts racing wildly. We survived," Emily said, but her voice was weak, barely audible. Christine looked at Michael. "But what was that?" Michael remained silent. He knew this was not the end. The hospital was still alive, and it was still waiting. Their encounter with the darkness had only been the beginning, and as they slowly walked back down the corridor, which now seemed ordinary again, A faint whisper sounded somewhere far away. "They will return. They will return."
After they escaped the basement, Michael, Emily, and Christine found themselves in the hospital's main corridor. It seemed to have returned to its usual state. Old wallpaper, peeling paint, the smell of medicine and dampness. But Michael's heart did not calm. He felt that the darkness remained somewhere nearby, watching, waiting for the right moment. "We have to find a way out of here," he said, his voice trembling. "There's nothing safe left here." Christine nodded. "But I can't forget what we saw. Those figures, those eyes." Emily placed her hand over her heart. "We survived by a miracle, but I feel this isn't over yet." They moved down the corridor, trying to stay together. Flashlights flickered, and each step echoed through the empty walls. Suddenly, Michael noticed an old door labeled Surgical Wing. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, but faint light shone through a crack beneath it. "We have to see what's in there," Michael said, though his instinct screamed, "Don't go in." Christine and Emily exchanged glances, but together they opened the door. Inside, the room was filled with old medical instruments, rusted, and large cabinets that once held medicine. On the walls were pinned strange diagrams and photographs of patients, faces half erased, eyes empty but alive, as if still watching after all these years. Suddenly, the flashlight illuminated a shadow moving. They turned. In the corner stood the silhouette of a woman in a torn coat, her face distorted by darkness. She vanished as quickly as she had appeared. "She's back," Emily whispered, stepping back. Michael took a deep breath. "We need to understand what this place is." He approached a table with old medical records. The papers were covered in dust, but the entries were legible. Experiments on humans, schemes to expand consciousness through fear, the use of darkness as a tool of control. They were trying to create something else, Michael said, feeling a chill run down his spine. "This isn't just a hospital, it's a laboratory fed by fear." Christine leaned over the table, noticing an old photograph. It depicted a group of doctors, and among them, the same woman in the coat, but living then with a normal face and a gaze full of pride. She was part of all this, and now she's here, Christine said. Suddenly, the door behind them slammed shut. Flashlights flickered, and a low, dull thud echoed through the room, as if something enormous was approaching. The air became thick and heavy. Breathing was difficult. "There's no room for fear here anymore," Michael said, trying to stay calm. "We have to move." They moved to the back of the room where they saw a narrow passage leading into darkness. Every step seemed endless, and the darkness around them seemed alive. Shadows thickened, forming faces that whispered in their ears, "You shouldn't have come. Leave this place." Emily covered her ears, but the whispering did not stop. Christine grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. Michael felt time slow, each second stretching into eternity. At the end of the passage, they encountered a large metal door labeled Underground Center. A faint beam of light shone from beneath the crack, and a quiet mechanical hum could be heard. "We're on the edge," Michael whispered, feeling his heart race wildly. "What's inside will change everything." Christine raised her hand, carefully opening the door. They stepped in slowly, and the room stunned their imagination. A vast laboratory filled with countless devices, screens, and flickering lamps. In the center stood a massive platform on which lay something resembling a human body, completely wrapped in wires and tubes. "They are still conducting experiments," Emily whispered, barely breathing. Michael stepped closer, noticing an old journal beside the platform. The pages were covered with technical notes and personal annotations. Fear, the source of energy; darkness, our calling; control over consciousness, the key. Suddenly, the platform came alive. The wires flickered, and the body began to move as if waking from centuries of sleep. Their presence had awakened what remained in the laboratory. "We have to leave," Christine whispered, but the door behind them slammed shut. From the darkness, she appeared again, the woman in the coat, her face distorted, eyes glowing green. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice violently mingling with the whispers of the room. Michael felt the darkness thicken around them, wrapping them, compressing chest and soul. Now we are part of her, he thought. But at the moment it seemed that fear would consume everything, the laboratory erupted in bright light. The body on the platform dissolved in the illumination, and the figure of the woman vanished as suddenly as she had appeared. The three friends found themselves on the empty floor, breathing heavily, hearts pounding wildly. They knew one thing: this hospital was not just an old building, it was alive, and its darkness would await the next visitor. Michael raised his flashlight and looked at Emily and Christine. "We survived, but this is only the beginning." They walked back through the corridors, leaving behind a shadow that followed but did not catch up, as if watching carefully. From deep within the hospital came a faint, dull whisper. "They survived, but they will return."
Emerging from the dark corridors of the old hospital, Michael, Emily, and Christine felt a strange balance between fear and determination. The darkness followed them, but this time they knew running away would no longer be enough. They had to confront it. "We can't just run," Michael said, holding his breath. "If we leave this place alive, it will keep hunting others." Christine nodded, her eyes shining with resolve. "Then we need to find the heart of this darkness. Then, maybe, we can destroy it." Emily looked around. "But how? We don't even know what it really is." Their steps led them back to the underground center, where the platform with the body entwined in wires stood. But now it was empty. On the floor lay an old journal with experimental notes, its pages glowing faintly green. "This is the source of its energy," Michael whispered. "They used fear to fuel this darkness, but if we find a way to disconnect it, maybe it will vanish." Christine carefully approached the platform. "We need to stop the process. Maybe it's a spell or a ritual, something that controls the darkness." The room's lights began to flicker, and from the shadows, the woman in the coat appeared again. Her face was twisted, her eyes shining with anger. "You think you can stop me?" Her voice sounded human and mechanical at once. Michael stepped forward. "We are not afraid. You no longer control us." The darkness thickened, trying to grab them, crush their chests, knock them down. But they stayed together. Christine opened the journal and began reading the ancient entries aloud, searching for the key to the ritual. "Light awakens the darkness, and darkness lives by fear. But fear can be destroyed by truth." Christine's voice rang with determination. The woman howled, the darkness swirled around them, but the body on the platform began to glow with white light. It seemed the hospital itself supported their resistance. Michael lifted an old lantern and held it toward the platform. The light from it merged with the glow from the journal, forming a powerful beam. The darkness began to retreat, screaming, breaking apart into fragments as if a strong wind had blown it away. Emily felt something burn her hand, but she did not pull back. The light strengthened them. They felt that fear no longer held them. The woman screamed her final words, which turned into empty whispers. She slowly disappeared, and with her, the shadows, the whispers, and the cold that had haunted them for hours. When all was quiet, the laboratory shone with pure white light. The air became light, and the silence was absolute. The body on the platform crumbled into tiny particles and vanished as if it had never existed. Michael took a deep breath. Emily grabbed his hand, and Christine embraced them both. "We did it," she whispered, unable to believe they had survived. They made their way to the exit. Outside, the dawn painted the sky in pink and gold hues. The old hospital walls seemed less terrifying in the morning light.
and the windmills slowly swayed above the rooftops as if guarding their victory. Michael looked at his friends. This is the end for this place. But remember, fear can live in people's hearts. We must not let it return. Emily nodded. We went through the darkness together. It taught us more than we could have imagined. Christine smiled. And we survived because we weren't alone. Together, we are stronger. They walked into the city, leaving the hospital behind, now appearing as just an abandoned building. Shadows still lingered inside, but they knew the darkness no longer ruled it. In that moment, Michael felt that something had changed, not only in the hospital, but in themselves. The fear that had once held them transformed into resolve, and they knew if they faced darkness again, they would be ready. On the horizon, the sun rose higher, bathing everything in warm light. And though the hospital remained a mystery from the past, its darkness was now tamed, and they, alive, strong, and ready for a new day. Michael, Emily, and Christine walked through the city streets, leaving the darkness behind. They were no longer victims, they had become conquerors of their own fear. And wherever they went, one truth remained in their hearts. Darkness may return, but the light of friendship, determination, and courage is always stronger.